Hey guys, it's been quite some time since we announced this video was coming, but here it is. The Ruokangas Valvebucker guitar, a player's perspective. I really wanted to give you my thoughts on this quite incredible instrument, or this new incredible system that Juha has come up with and that is now available with all of his guitars. Let me sort of start by telling you what I think this is, in sort of my words, maybe, with more of a player's twist to it. The Valvebucker is really not a model of guitar. It's an integrated guitar pickups and electronic system, this beautifully glowing apparatus you can see right here. And people have had the tendency to think of it like a regular guitar pickup with a tube preamp, which is totally not what this is, but I'll get to that. Try to think of it like this. The chain starts with a pickup. It's not just a regular guitar pickup, it is a very specialty guitar pickup. It's still a passive magnetic pickup, but it is a super sensitive one. So the idea is to just use a very weak pickup element, much like an old tube microphone like a U67, to capture an incredibly detailed picture of the strings, much like the capsule of an old tube microphone captures every little detail of what's happening around its capsule, all right? And then the tubes come into play, because this way of capturing sound has some downsides as well. Using such a weak element, you can pick up much more detail because the pickup can respond faster and more precisely to very, very small changes in this case, the vibration of the string. But using such a weak pickup also means it's going to create a very weak signal, which isn't really going to be at a usable level for sort of a guitar rig or even just for driving a cable. So what we need right there at the source, not somewhere down the line, is some way of amplifying that signal. And what else to do that with than tubes? Could you do that with something else? Something maybe a little more practical? Yeah, maybe, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that, all right? So the idea is you have this weak signal and then you have tubes to amplify it, like has been done for a long time. And that is also the reason why, the tubes are inside of the guitar. They're right in there. You can see them glow. There's two of them. They need to be right there. If you were to put them further down the line, the signal wouldn't even make it, or the majority of the signal wouldn't even make it from the pickup to the first pedal in line or the amp or whatever it is that comes after your guitar pickup. So it does need to be right there. Now, yes, you could do that with transistor-based technology, but this incredibly detailed way of capturing the strings yields an incredibly broad frequency response, which means you get much higher highs than a regular guitar pickup does, and you get much lower lows than a regular guitar pickup does. So you have a very broad frequency spectrum that is being picked up, and using the tubes and their natural compression characteristic just sort of ever so slightly rounds off the picture and gives a very musical representation of what is a very unconventionally large frequency spectrum for an electric guitar. If you were to use transistors for this, it would sound a lot less pleasant, especially given that this really defies the expectations of an electric guitar and its sound. That's kind of what it is. I hope that makes sense. I really like this analogy of the old tube mic. If you know how an old tube mic works and why it has the tubes right there in the microphone and why it needs an external power supply that comes with it, then you're onto this. Then you kind of know how this thing works. It's sort of the same principle at work. But this video is not supposed to be just sort of a factual description. It's supposed to be a player's perspective. So let me kind of give you a perspective of this instrument. So I do have some first-hand experience of actually using this in the field. I've used it on a couple of productions and I've used it live, not this guitar specifically, but a previous prototype. And here's how I sort of contextualize it musically. So there is one added benefit to this pickup, or to this integrated system as a whole, that I think is even more important or more more significant than the broad frequency range, and that is that it has a finer resolution of the dynamics of the guitar. So it can pick up even the slightest brush of the string, and it has a lot more headroom for you to really dig in before the circuitry says, that's enough, bro, okay? No further, all right? So the range, both in the extreme quiet parts and the extreme loud parts, is larger, but then also the resolution in between is much finer. And that, to me as a player, is sort of the most significant thing about this guitar. And what does that obviously lend itself to? Well, sort of music that has a lot of space for you to actually hear all those minute differences and nuances in the dynamics. But while I have used this guitar and intend in the future to use it with my own trio, where there is a lot of space for all this to be heard, I've also used it in louder, denser productions, and it sort of revealed a couple of characteristics that were really handy in that situation as well. Because the guitar has such a high headroom capability, it actually cuts through a mix extremely well. So while you may sort of, consider this a bit of a heretical use of the guitar, I actually used this on a punk track.
Leute meinen voll entzücken, sie können einen unterdrücken, ob bei einer U-Bahn-Fahrt im Kino oder Supermarkt. Sie mucken, lügen, drohen und rempeln, schubsen, sich vorzudrängen, nennen dich ja schon anderen Namen, können kein Bitte, Danke sagen.
And there's sort of, in the verses, there's sort of a ska offbeat guitar, and that's not specifically this one, but a previous prototype of the Valvebucker guitar. And just because it has such high headroom, the attack is incredibly strong and cuts through, in that case, a very dense mix like a knife through butter. And obviously, the wide frequency response, and this also portraying very high frequencies, helps with that significantly. It has an impact on the attack characteristics of your playing. You're sort of inclined to think of this as very useful in a clean or very, very slightly dirty context, right? All this resolution, all this sparkle. But what happens if you put distortion on it? Now, I personally was actually expecting for it to handle it quite badly and for that to be a quite unusable sound because of all that extra frequency range and all that extra harmonic content that I expected to present the sound in a very harsh way. But that was actually not the case at all. There's another clip I really want to share with you guys with a band called Orange Line where we sort of play more traditional fusion music. And while I am using it for all the funky stuff that seems, again, like a pretty obvious use of this high headroom capability, I'm also using it for all the sort of staring lead lines. And it's not harsh at all, but it has a very interesting and very strong attack characteristic. And all that harmonic content actually just makes the distorted sound very rich. It makes it feel like multi-layered, like you've already done a lot of things to it to really make it shine in the context of a mix and to really make it pop and just sound very produced, I suppose. It's really weird because all of this is happening at the very beginning of the chain and not, after the mic, in the DAW or in the outboard or wherever that stuff would usually happen. But it sort of has a similar produced sheen to it that is really attractive to my ears. Somebody asked how this thing performs in a metal context. I actually had a chance to try that out with a friend of mine, and the answer is it's different. It's not unusable, but that harmonic content and that harmonic richness actually gives a certain attack characteristic that is not as brutal as you might want it. You might want to say the sound is a bit too classy for it. And that is not to be a value judgment. That's just sort of me trying to contextualize it in that sort of music. And I don't think that's what I personally would want to go for in that setting. But again, that really comes down to preference. You can use it. It can certainly handle being downtuned. It can handle a lot of gain. You will have to EQ it a little differently, but you absolutely can do it. I have used this with considerable amounts of gain, although warmer gain and less fizzy gain. All right, so yeah, that'll be up to you to try out ultimately. So I guess bottom line for my take on this instrument or on this system is that it is a lot more versatile than I expected. So yeah, it's a specialty thing. It's expensive. It's not really around. It's not really hanging in every store for you to try out. And not everybody is going to benefit from all that dynamic resolution and frequency range. But still, it can be used in a lot of contexts in place of any other electric guitar and will just sort of give you a different take on it. So while I still would consider it a specialty instrument, it's actually a lot more versatile and usable than I thought, and kind of made a lot of situations shine that I absolutely didn't expect it would. So yeah, that's actually a big vote of confidence from me for this instrument, far beyond the reaches of sort of nerdy specialty music. We sort of did, this is not supposed to be Q&A, but we sort of did a previous video just kind of collecting questions from you guys about this instrument, because it is the sort of idea and the sort of concept that still sort of puzzles people and maybe weirds them out a little. So there's maybe a bit of healthy skepticism about it, but also some apprehension that is really not justified. And because you can't just pick this up off a wall at a local music store, and it's really hard to just kind of play one of these, we wanted to give you the chance to ask your questions, also maybe to somebody who's not the builder, who's not the creator, and although closely affiliated, maybe has a little bit of a more, more of a neutral take on it all. So here's answering some of your questions. So a couple of really pragmatic questions. How's it powered? It does have a power supply. It is a pedal that first of all supplies the power to the guitar and also carries the audio signal. And you can just kind of patch it into your pedal board, although it does sort of have to be at the beginning of it. And it provides power. And it connects to the guitar using an XLR cable. Somebody asked if using an XLR cable sort of makes it unwieldy because the cable is so much thicker and stiffer. I don't really know that mic cables are necessarily thicker and stiffer than instrument cables. They usually aren't. You can get them thicker, you can get them thinner, you can sort of get them in any variety. So just kind of find an XLR cable that gives you the right compromise between sonic integrity, shielding, handling noise, and flexibility, and you're good to go. What else? There were some safety concerns about having an instrument that receives power, enough power to run tubes, and having it be so close to you. Also like in a live setting where, I don't know, things happen. I sort of thought about how I want to tackle that question. So first concern, heat. Yes, these tubes produce warmth. That's just kind of in the nature of tubes. Can't be helped, right? I'm holding my hand right over the system, and I can feel warmth emanating from this apparatus. It is not at all unpleasant. It is barely more than the surrounding temperature, and it absolutely isn't enough to harm your guitar, especially the wood surrounding this, in any way. So I actually, sort of funny side note, thought, you know, in those late autumn months when you have to play some outdoor gigs that you really kind of don't want to play because it's getting cold and your fingers are kind of getting stiff, it would probably be quite cozy to just kind of put them here and warm them up. And that is probably going to be a really usable side effect of having tubes in your guitar. The other side concern was regarding the power and the electricity and sort of the grounding of it all. Well, I mean, this thing is grounded through the XLR cable, and the unit has its own fuse. Just consider this. This is a specialty item made by complete experts that have an incredibly tight quality control, and this system has been sort of revised and developed over the course of like 10 years. So they got this right. Just consider how much equipment you're around on stage every day that, first of all, runs significantly more dangerous voltages than this guitar and more dangerous current that is made in some factory somewhere with absolutely zero or very lacking quality control, and you're not concerned about the safety of that. So you really, really do not have to be concerned about the safety of this. There was one question that was also sort of answered already in our previous video, but I still want to pick up on it. Can you like sort of swap different tubes in and out for different sonic characteristics? No, you cannot. These tubes are integrated into it. It is very finely calibrated and adjusted for the tubes that are in there. And it is not the kind of device that you can just kind of, try different tubes in and see how it sounds. They also have a slightly different format than like your standard 12AX7 that you put in an amp or in some guitar pedals that use tubes. And you really shouldn't mess with them. In terms of durability and what happens if a tube fails, these are sub-miniature military-grade tubes that have an incredible rigidity and longevity, and should anything ever happen to them, they have to be professionally replaced, but it is possible, it's not expensive, they're actually quite affordable, and it's also not really that big of a concern, ultimately. There's one more thing that came up that I think is kind of a natural result of this using an XLR cable. Can you just plug this straight into like the mic input of a board or a preamp? No. It uses an XLR cable, so it has that form factor, but very different things are carried through this cable than are carried through a mic cable that connects a mic with a preamp. This needs significantly higher power than even like a condenser or phantom-powered microphone, and I'm not even sure the pin layout is the same. So just don't try and connect this directly to like a preamp or a console, because that might go horribly wrong. I don't know, but just don't. Does this instrument lend itself to being recorded DI? Yeah, absolutely. But you will still have to connect this to its power supply and then run that through a DI and hit the board with that, which is just like you'd record any other guitar plus the power supply online. The power supply is sort of another instance of these guys just really thinking things through, because they were like, all right, so this is an XLR cable. I can't use that to connect any other regular guitar. So what if I don't want to use exclusively the Valvebucker system on a gig? What do I do with all my other stuff? Do I like have to include an AB switch? No, because it's integrated in the power supply. It also sort of acts as an interface and as an AB switch between this system that needs power and any other regular guitar that doesn't. And you can just sort of switch directly on the pedal, which I think is just, really great that they thought this through before users and customers had the opportunity to point it out. So that's just how these guys roll. All right. And that's sort of it for the questions that you guys had. Although there is one more, but that's sort of a different context. And I think I want to close with that. Why? Why do this? Why put a tube in a guitar? Why go through all that effort? Why would you do that? There was a gentleman on YouTube who posted a clip of another guitar player, a brilliant guitar player, playing brilliantly on just a regular electric guitar. And I say regular, but I don't mean that in a diminutive way. It was a brilliant sound, and he played incredibly. And he posed the question, do you really think this needs to be improved upon? And I get it. I think it is a somewhat unproductive conservative approach, but I still understand where he's coming from, because, we all love what the electric guitar sounds like, right? That's why we're doing it. And nobody, including me and the guys at Ruokangas, think there's anything wrong with what an electric guitar sounds like. And please don't misunderstand this as an improvement of the electric guitar that we all know and love. This is not supposed to be an improvement, and it is also not to be understood as sort of pointing out what's wrong with a regular electric guitar. That is absolutely beside the point. Consider this an evolution, much like the electric guitar was an evolution of the acoustic guitar. And we don't consider the acoustic guitar inferior to the electric, right? Indisputably, one evolved from the other, but now they coexist. One does its thing and the other does its thing. Another thing. That's great, and both are great. And that's what this is. This to me is an evolution. It is not an improvement. It feels like a different instrument. It sounds slightly different. It feels considerably different when you're playing it. But most importantly, it also wants you to play differently. With all this dynamic resolution, with this more extended sound, I noticed it really required me to play it differently. And that is what, in my opinion, just makes it a different instrument. Yeah, I mean, it looks an awful lot like an electric guitar, and it doesn't sound all that unlike an electric guitar, but it makes me play very differently, and it does a different thing, or it does the same thing very differently, and I just consider this something else. It's an evolution. It can be an alternative to an electric guitar, to a regular electric guitar in a lot of cases, but it was never intended to replace that. So maybe sort of keep that in mind when you're asking why. Well, because we all share the spirit of invention, and because this could be done, and it was a really intriguing prospect, and it yielded something that is incredibly musical and useful, and really fuels me artistically, and I think is going to be an incredible asset and addition to my tool case. It's a beautiful thing. It's its own thing. And yeah, I really hope some of you, or a lot of you, will get the chance to try one of these one day, because it has been a considerable revelation to me, and I think it's going to play a significant part in my musical endeavors to come. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope I could shine a light on some of the questions you guys may have, maybe provide a different perspective than the manufacturer can. And yeah, thank you so much for watching.